All right. Without further ado, lies, more lies, and ransomware statistics.
Okay, turn the mic on. Oh, I can hear myself. Great. Okay. So let's see what we can do. So my name is Dennis. I'm an engineer.
Hi, Dennis.
Yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you guys through some of the business decisions that we make internally for our own company, for our products, and what to do and what to charge, things like that. And also some of the number crunching that we try to give our clients from an advisory sense, because actually this is one of the most difficult challenges I've had so far in my career, is to provide some kind of quantification that I can defend on who's going to get hit with ransomware, what's the probability, and what's the impact, right? The numbers are all over the place, just to warn you. We're not going to boil the ocean here, but I'm going to walk you through some of the stuff that we're doing internally and some of the challenges that I had, and when at one point I had to walk away because I got too angry. So we'll definitely cover that one. So first of all, I noticed a large technical crowd here, right? So some of you, of course, know exactly what this slide is all about. Some of you, maybe you've never seen it before, and that's cool either way, right? So we're talking about the probability and the impact of risk, and this is a good diagram to show. So what we're going to say is, what is the probability and what is the impact, the death to the business, right, for a ransomware attack? It sounds super easy, right, to maybe pick one and go with it. The challenge is that, when you're looking, okay, what do I want to do? What can I do to actually maybe figure out what needs to be done for ransomware, right? One of the biggest things that I see, and of course, what's that saying? If you buy IBM, you don't start getting fired. Like, just buy what the neighbors are buying kind of thing. Well, what's happening with ransomware is really, really interesting to me. There's enough data out there, I call it enough fail on the defender side, that we actually have some really good metrics, right? And one of them is that, it's like I have to face forward like a proper speaker. So one of the challenges is that people are buying like next-gen endpoint security products, right? As part of the suite of things that they're buying to try to keep up and combat ransomware. Because when the boss is asking, what are you doing about ransomware? You better have an answer. Hopefully it's a good answer, but you have to have an answer, right? Around 61% of people are out there actually buying endpoint security products, right? EDRs. Well, if you notice here, if you take some market survey results, EDRs, like next-gen endpoint products, really only have around 36% of market penetration, right? So there's not a ton of people out there buying the stuff that probably a lot of the people here have in their businesses, right? Of that group, if you look at the numbers, over 3/4 of the victims of ransomware have those tools. So what's going on is that the ransomware people perversely are attacking the folks who have security budgets, right? Who have the money to go after you, right? They're not going after the penniless nonprofit that has no security product and has, I don't want to name any names to make anyone feel bad, but like free antivirus. They're not going after those folks. They're going after the folks who are spending money on backups, endpoint security. And it's not because folks like you aren't trying to do something, right? And they did a survey, I think it was Sophos did it, and it was 91% companies said they want to do something or they already had something, right, to try to combat ransomware. So it's definitely something that we're all concerned about. Unfortunately, the attackers are going after the ones that are concerned, right? So let's first start with the risk management exercise. Let's say, okay, we need to prepare to ask for budget. Like, you want to go buy a tool, right? So what's step one for any project? Find a scapegoat, right, for when it fails. But really, you need to find some kind of third-party data source to say, look, this is the probability and this is the impact for the ransomware attack, right? This is the risk management exercise we've got to do when preparing for budget. Make sure you defend your math, right? If there's the board members who love numbers, maybe it's a CFO on the board, there should be one probably, right? Then you need to make sure that they don't have numbers that are wildly different than yours, so you're not stuck with this battle of the facts, trying to figure out what the right facts are. We'll get into that. I've actually never seen an environment like this before where the numbers for risk management are so wildly off that it actually causes some major problems in deciding risk spend. Of course, I know everyone in this organization, everyone, all the attendees, your board meetings are very nice. You all decide numbers logically, and you move forward, right? Maybe no one laughed, so that was my one joke. Yeah. Okay, so let's get back to business. Okay, so if you get it wrong, we have enough fail again, or enough win on the good guy's side, that we actually get to see the effects of getting it wrong, right? You just, we'll say that like someone just says, I'm gonna go buy an EDR, and we're gonna call it quits, right? That's gonna be my solution. And just like, data breaches, there can be stolen data, right? The business still is able to earn revenue, right? It's not a business continuity issue in many cases, right? With ransomware, you have this whole extra element where it's not like, you lost data and then everyone argues about reputational cost and, regulatory costs and things like that. And it's all cost of doing business. In this case, you have major impact. Like the CFO has line items for the kind of impact here for ransomware, right? Whenever the business stops operating with revenue, at that point, honestly, if you look at the numbers and then pull up FEMA reports, it's very similar to a major fire in like a restaurant. It's a very, very similar track into how long your business has before it's gone forever, which is a very scary place to be, right? One thing that I really want to point out here is that even when you pay the ransom and survive, 61% of the time, your organization has lost the data forever. Now, a little war story here. I had a phone call last week from someone who they got hit with ransomware. It was a manufacturing plant, and they gave us a call back and said they're taking care of the problem themselves. They don't need our decryptors or anything. I asked, do you need help, whatever, Well, it turns out they said, no, we're deleting all the hacker files. They were going through all their servers and deleting all the encrypted files, their files, right? And they said they were almost done. And I don't know if they're ever going to call again, because at that point their business is gone, right? So but regardless, so 64% lose data, 82% lose business critical data. And what that means is the old game of backups, right? Where the hackers maybe got the most recent backups, but the ones in the tape drives back inside the mountain are pretty safe, right? And so you now have 23 copies of 2011 tax returns to your business, but you don't have the RFPs that were due next week, right? And so what's happening is that 82% actually of that 61%, that's kind of weird, but they've lost business critical data. It's not just like, hey, I lost my photos that weren't really important. It's, I lost the stuff that I need to service my customers contractually. I have obligations. I have sales things going on. That data's gone forever. Even on doing decryption, it didn't quite work, right? It's known. Are there any MSPs or IT providers in the audience? It's always like, no one ever raised their, there's someone actually raised their hand. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry to put you on the spot. So what happens is when, if you're like MSP, your managed service provider, IT provider, gets hit with ransomware, or has a customer that gets hit with ransomware, if the other customers find out, in 15% of the time, half the customers walk within 3 days once they find out. Normally within 75% of the time, at least one customer beyond the one that got hit with ransomware walks, right? So these are very, very serious issues, even for the IT providers, right? Because no one, it's almost like this social stigma. We're gonna get into this a little bit more, where no one wants to talk about getting hit with ransomware, but it's happening enough that when it does happen, even though we're spending money to try to stop it, what happens is that people are losing business, they're losing their livelihoods, things like that. Normally I stop here and ask questions, but this does not seem like people aren't like in the mosh pit here, like ready to ask questions. So, another technique you can use. I've seen this actually at play before. This was. Have you guys ever heard of Martha's Vineyard? It's actually part of a larger corporation. It's a government body. So their operating revenues and their balance sheets are all kind of out there for the public to read if you really want to do it. And what happened was that they had spent a ton of money on backups and other things to try to stay in business, to react and respond very quickly to ransomware, right? There was an old game I saw being played. At one point I was over at NSA, National Security Agency, and there was a game they played with government contracts where if they knew they weren't going to succeed or couldn't succeed, then they would redefine the success metrics, right? They would kind of scale back what success was so they could all come back and be like, we won! And it was like, yeah, but you only did like half what you said you were going to do in the beginning, right? So in this case, what I'm seeing is in some cases, to manage the risk and manage reputational damage to the IT team, to the leadership, these quotes are actually from the security leadership, right? I'm sure he's a great guy. I'm sure they tried really hard, right? Ransomware happened. They finally got minimal services up after a week it's called the Steamship Authority or something. Jim, one of my guys, is from Boston, so he's all about it. Up in that area, and what happened was, they were up and running, right, within a week. Well, I pulled down the balance sheets, and I said, what are we talking about here in terms of the revenue loss of the company for that 1 week after they spent all that money on backups so they can come back within a week, right? Turns out they lost $3.6 million in sales, in revenue, based on projections, for that period. That put them in the red for the next 18 months. There's no coming back. They're in the red if they do everything right? And so that's the table stakes here, really, is that, even when you say, oh, we did it, we're back within norm, the norm is actually like 12 days or 15 days, something like that, to get minimal services back. They did it within a week. They still are in the red. Like, the business is no longer profitable, just on that one event. So let's focus on ransoms. That's like if you're going to define the risk and the cost of the business, there's a whole bunch of variables, and there's some really, really smart people that do all that discrete math that we kind of slept through in college, right? That have 1,000 variables to figure out the risk exposure, how much it's going to cost the business, things like that. Let's start with ransom. I redacted the names of the data sources on purpose because I didn't want to name anyone. I don't want that to be a focus, and maybe it's because of the source, right? These are 3 leading industry standard sources that people, like previous presentations, actually use in their analysis on, in their advisory, things like that. The first one showed 3 years of ransoms, right? And we have $4,300, $5,900, and $8,100. That is not a typo, right? What is a typo, in that face, exactly the face I made, it was like, this can't be real, What happened was you dig into their math. This was a major publication by an international company. What happened was that they forgot to put in a 0 in one of their calculations. And then it went straight through to publishing. People layered on their analysis and their math. And then you can actually Google around. It's still out there being repeated. What happened was that those numbers were then used by other publications because it's now like trusted source. And 3 or 4 layers down, I found an article where someone was advising on how much insurance to buy for their company based on the $8,100 ransom, right? Which everyone in this room should say, that sounds kind of low, right? But these are, desktop publishing people. They don't know the numbers like we do, right? We have data source 2, right, which had $84,000, which is probably more reasonable, maybe. It's not newsworthy, right? I mean, that's sad to say, but with the losses, it's not the $5 million ransoms, right? It's a respectable number. We have data source 3, again, a very, very reputable source. They have some inside knowledge into some of the insurance payouts, actually, so from cyber insurance, and they're coming with numbers for average and median. Now, I know Kyle previously did a whole bunch of like mathy things with bits and bytes and everything, right? We're not going to go that deep, but if you look up the difference between average and median, so what happens is that basically there's a whole bunch of lower cost ransoms that are being accounted for, and we're going to talk about that in a second. So what that means is that there may be larger ransom sums, but what's happening is it's called a hey, it's not showing. I'd like to throw a graph there to show it. But basically if you look at the graph, right, then I'm really bad about standing in my spot. So if there's a graph right here, it would show there's a whole bunch near the vertical axis, right? And it kind of tails off. And when that happens, that's the number you get on data source 3, right? So that means they're having access to a whole bunch of data that show low, like it's like a volume game, low money value, high volume, a whole bunch of transactions at lower numbers, right? I'm going to call that a lie in a second, right? So look at the raw data. This is from where the good guys beat the hackers. They only got $1.8 billion, and they gave up. We got them, right? So they retired because they got out. They're probably back in our group now, right? But we got some awesome raw data off of their winnings, basically, right? Rather fitting more in a casino, right? So there were about 3,000 victims that they released keys for. I'm not going to ask any feds in here. This isn't DEF CON. But there were 88 victims that law enforcement was tracking at the moment, right, that they knew about that were reported, right? If you do the math, that means that of all of our risk analysis we're all doing for our boards and our companies and our managers, we have 3% visibility into what's really going on. That means that companies are getting hit and they're not reporting. The average ransom in the data from Abaddon, from those folks, is a really cool ZDNet report, there's other ones out there, was that the ransom was actually 600,000. So we go back, is that anywhere close to what we're seeing here? Not at all, right? So companies are getting bled, right? They're trying to fix the problem. It's almost like a social stigma, like, I don't know, like VD or something. Like, you can't talk about it ever, you know, like in normal society, right? And so that's what we're seeing here, right? This is not a good situation for us as the IT security and the business leaders to try to mitigate risk. Imagine if the fire departments had that kind of like shortage of data, right? There would be major, major problems with city blocks burning down. So possible biases we have here. I'm probably dating myself a little bit with that screenshot. So we have an issue where we do have missing data sometimes. It's not always that egregious, but I do find that there are mistakes in the math. I'm assuming it's because there's just so much strange data out there that people are trying to put together, myself included, where I'm like, towards the end I'm gonna say, this is what my gut says, because we have to do it at some point, you know, because there's just not enough good data out there on this. So the crime with the missing zero really was that there's only so much data that is out there, right? And we have to trust it because we don't know what to trust, right? And so the real crime here is that that data is fueling the exact same people that are doing analysis at your insurance company, right? At law enforcement, at other places to fuel pricing for products, like we're doing, right? To fuel, okay, what's really the cost to the business? What is the business impact, right? The probability, we already know now, we only have 3% visibility, right? But in terms of the cost, right, we really need to watch what we feel might be wrong. I mean, I don't have a better answer for you than that, right? But I'm trying to figure out, when we go through the analysis, is kind of like, what feels right, what doesn't feel right, what can I latch on to that's good? There's actually a government report that came out, I'll get to in a second, that helps out a lot with that. We'll go into that. I'm very happy about it. The second possible bias is the victim profile. So first of all, the ransoms for like small Indian companies are much, much lower, like $3,000 to $5,000, really, right? And what's interesting is that different verticals have different ransoms of which the market can bear, right? So medtech can afford to pay a lot more ransom and to keep it quiet before that FDA testing, right, than, say, a mom and pop butcher, right? It's just the way it works, right, for every industry ever. So what's happening is that depending on who is willing to speak up, we'll get to this in a second, depends on, it heavily skews the ransom. Now, if 10,000 small companies in India, in Pakistan, all report that they go with ransomware, right? But then the companies in the United States that have breach counsel on the phone, and some strange security company person asks them, hey, have you gotten ransomware? Can you tell us the ransom? How much did it cost your company that week? Please don't tell shareholders, right? You're not going to answer, right? And so that is actually one of the biases I'm seeing, is that folks that don't have the lawyer up culture, the mature kind of like breach response culture like we have here in America, tend to answer up more. And that, I want to say, pollutes the metrics, but it definitely has a very meaningful effect that we already saw with the graph that I had to pantomime, you know? So the second thing we see is that I call it the Goldilocks for ransomware. Like, so what I see is that we saw some African clinics got hit, right? And they had computers, of course. This isn't like, you know, they were in the dark ages. But they also still had a ton of paper because they didn't quite trust the computer stuff for power reasons or whatever. I mean, this is like UN, right? So it's not like they're living the dark ages, right? But they had all the paper records. So they went down for ransomware. It stunk for them. You know, they weren't super happy. They had to have it fixed. But they went right back to the paper records, right? And then, so it didn't really have the impact for them like it would if it like UPMC or whatever, and you're all digital now, right? So the second point for the Goldilocks, you know, method is that the super big and very technical people at these very large Fortune 50 companies, they require a different style of attack to actually have meaningful impact, right? A small attack on a branch in a big bank, big international conglomerate, isn't going to have the same impact, right? You have a different style of laying low, spreading out, going through. It could be 6 months or a year before you actually hit them with the ransomware, right? And take out enough data to really put the pain on them, right? That's not going to be like a ransomware as a service, kind of like a script kiddie just running through, right? What I find are the most vulnerable actually are folks that have some good tech in place. They have like maybe Office 365 set up, and they have SharePoint, they have all these cool things going on and backups, right? They are dependent on the technology, but they're not so mature and big that they don't have like 7 hot sites set across the United States, right? Like that's not what we're talking about here. So what we find is that the folks who do have successful businesses, have good technology, have EDRs and antivirus and all the cool things, right? And firewalls are the ones that actually hurt the most for ransomware attacks. Because, we already saw that little chart, right? They're going after folks who have budget for security, right? They're bypassing it in various ways, that's not this presentation, right? But we're seeing that really helps define kind of like your risk. We don't have good numbers, right? But we can say, look, we're not, Bank of America, I don't know, yeah, but we are a company that is technology-driven, independent, and email-driven, right? Then we know that, okay, the ransomware probably going to hit us hard, And the ransomware vector, so I love using this example because there was a data source that had a whole lot of reporting on the Stop ransomware variant, the family, right? And unfortunately, Stop ransomware, their big claim to fame was actually file share, like pirated software and pirated movies and stuff. That was their major vector for spreading, right? Well, the bias there was that Stop ransomware, the individuals who are downloading pirated copies of Office are not the big game hunters, right? They're not the people who can afford to pay big ransoms. And so this one reporting that came out, once they realized that it was all Stop ransomware, I was like, no wonder the numbers are so low. It's all like college kids, and people who are like pirating Sex and the City episodes. They're not gonna like pay a lot of money in ransoms, right? And so the data sources of where the security companies are getting their metrics heavily is affected by the ransomware that they're exposed to. Does that all make sense? Like no one's like walking out in droves. I guess it's all good, paid by the hour. Okay, so also who is willing to talk, right? I kind of went back to this a little bit. So the large ransomware data sets for reporting, it seems to be very survey driven. It's down to who does not have a lawyer who says shut your mouth, right? Rightfully so, probably, right? It's smaller organizations. I've noticed also it can be cultures that are more open and more collaborative than ones who are less collaborative, right? That seems to also follow a trend from like a society standpoint, right? Or organizations that are more collaborative or industries, right? So what happens is that shapes, it's a big enough problem, 3%, we only know about 3% of it, right? It's a big enough problem that dramatically influences the data you have in front of you. For smaller ransomware data sets, what I'm seeing is there's companies that specialize in incident response, right? DFIR, right? And they normally have a limited set of customers, right, that have ransomware. There's like, 3,500 security companies all servicing folks in the United States alone, right? So they have a very limited view of maybe a few hundred people, that were victims, right? And they're basing all of their metrics off of that, which is a dangerous place to be. Any medical study that has 300 people only, that's not a good medical study to rely, put your life on the line for, right? You want thousands and thousands of people, right? So we also see that, sometimes it's mandated disclosures. Now that could be because of like government regulation. That could be contractually, right? That could be where you're an IT provider and your customers talk to each other, or they're down the street from each other and all of a sudden the restaurant's closed, right? So there are different disclosures that, can happen. Sometimes you really don't trust your NDA because the employees figure out what's going on, right? And the next thing you know, they're on Facebook and they're talking, right? And that can cause serious money, but it does give some good insight into what's going on, right? There are certain ransomware incidents we would never have known about hadn't it been for people kind of leaked it out, right? Because of actually a mandated disclosure to a supplier. I am seeing where public relations attack mitigation strategies, minimization. Call your PR firm, have them kind of manage the communications, just like a breach, right? They gotta be fast, right? This is ransomware, right? Your business is going down, possibly. So I do see that. That also seems to affect where there could have been some good data. There's a very large consulting firm that came back and they said, okay, we went down from ransomware, there was no impact, but we're back in business now, a week later, And I was like, okay, at least have some sense to it. Don't say there was no impact when you're down, right? So we do see though where it kind of hides data from us as security folks, because we could have gotten good data there, right? In terms of like, okay, what did they do that worked? What did they do that didn't work? What was the probability they felt? Like, what did they do right and wrong? And that's kind of, would be good for us to have, right? And unfortunately, I get why. There's very good reasons why, but we don't have access to that data. And of course, small companies normally are much more open about these ransomware attacks and things like that. They're by their nature more community-oriented normally, and they will disclose more. Again, it goes back to that graph that I wish I'll have to find it. Where low ransoms for a mom and pop shop. A gas station is not going to pay the same amount as UPMC, right? Just common sense, right? They don't have the budget to. So those were the problems, right? I'm an engineer, right? So who decided it was a good idea to start a company, right? So I'm sure my employees hate me saying that, but what happened was I said, okay, you know what? I'm a data scientist, I'm an engineer, I can figure this out. Give me all the raw data, right? So I poured through stuff and I figured out where the best sources of raw data were, and I had this masterful, beautiful Excel spreadsheet with like 80 variables in it. And I said, I'm gonna figure this out because I need to know if I'm overcharging or undercharging for my ransomware prevention products. I mean, really, it's selfish, right? To figure out, and I can convince people that here's the probability, here's the impact. I finally have the numbers, the goose is cooked, right? Well, so I started doing that, and I realized the third world country issue was becoming a problem, right? Where the low-paying ransoms weren't as much, and there was polluting the data unless I'm talking to them, right? Like, don't go to a North American company, and throw out a whole bunch of numbers from third world, right? That's not going to be a good lineup for anyone, right? So what happened was that as I was going through, I got the data right. It was great. It was in an Excel spreadsheet. And then I realized that the numbers kept coming out no matter how I divided and added between the cells and the columns and the rows. It was always 5.69 was the ratio for everything. And I was like, let me put in more companies, or I'm sorry, more countries. I put in Canada, I put in Switzerland, I put in Sweden and Great Britain. It was always 5.69. So that's where I kind of freaked out a little bit. Not in a good way either, because I did all that work and I had all the available data out there. I think I talked about it here before. Yeah, and I was like, well, it's all made up then, because there is no way the economies of every single first world country have the same currency ratios and the same market verticals and everything, right? It had to have been all made up at some point, where I feel like some intern was like, I give up, and they started slapping in numbers and was like, no one ever guessed this, because I didn't see it until the very end, and it wasn't even a clean number. It was 5.6874964 or something like that, right? And I was like, no way that number, that specific, called significant digits, right, would ever have survived past all 80 variables, right, for all the different countries. Which means I went right back to square one, where I was like, great, now I got gut feelings and I got butterflies in the air, right? But I do have 3% exposure, for what's that worth, So, did that all make sense to you guys, why the numbers shouldn't be lining up that cleanly across the global economies? Okay, cool. And now you see why I took the names of the reports off of here, because I don't want to I don't want that to be the focus. I want the problem with the numbers to be the focus, right? So we're right back to here, right? I mean, right back to where I was, right? Where I was just now what do I do, right? Because you're like, well, what's the probability? What's the impact? All I can tell you is that I'm right back to gut feelings, right? And that every survey out there is now suspect, right? I'm looking over my shoulder no matter what number I give. So here comes the Federal Crimes Enforcement Network, FSAN, right? I guess I said FedSAN, maybe. New report came out. I recommend you go find it and you read it. One of the first things that they did, it was great, is they said again, I'm not part of their organization, right? But I read that quote and I read through it, and I said the first thing they saw was, we need more visibility, right? We need something that we can hang our hat on. I mean, it's a federal, like, crimes enforcement network. They're very financially driven, right? So of course, the quants, the accountants, the CFOs, the risk managers, they want to have numbers they can rely on, right? Just like we do, right? I got to know how much to ask the boss for, and I got to be able to defend it, right? So great, they said, hey, in the fall of 2020, that was just a little bit ago, right? They said we want to have more visibility into what's going on. So they started asking IR companies to put stuff in. Now, it was kind of like a ask told, right? Without a whole lot of teeth at this point, quite honestly. And what happens is you see here, 2020, they started to get a lot more data in, right? Now we're not beating that 3% yet, but we're doing a good job now, right? We have better visibility in the numbers we can rely on, right? From US-based IR firms. It's not global, right? It's US, so it's our market, right? And it's folks who have gone ahead and gone to IR firms, so you're not going to get grandma trying to get the grandkids' photos back as much, right? You're going to get companies like ours that actually have needs to stay in business, right? And what's great is that you see here on the 2021, we're starting to get velocity now, right? Because now we're starting to see what's going on in a better way. With the disclosures, we have a higher number now in 2021, and they only measure till June. So now we know, okay, we knew it was kind of bad, we didn't know how bad, but now we see that the velocity is, well, it was bad, sort of, it's much worse now, right? We got that, right? So if nothing else, you can point to the velocity, data-driven, right, from the US government, showing you that ransomware is more of a problem now for organizations than it was before. Not blocked attacks or whatever. These are victims. This is all IR. This is all ransoms being paid out from IR firms that have agreed to collaborate with the US government. How am I in time anyway? Am I? Oh, wow, okay. So strategy 2, and by the way, I am super, super excited about this report. I recommend you go download it. I had no play at all in it, right? You can find me on LinkedIn with that weird QR code, and if you trusted it, and go ahead and ask for it, and I'll send you the link. So strategy 2 was follow the money. Now, there's the visibility problem here. Let's talk about that for a second. But following the money has been a great way to follow people, whether it's like the mob, whether it's like terrorists, or political campaigns that maybe gone awry, all kind of things, right? So following the money, what they did was they found 177 Bitcoin addresses that were known to be used by the bad guys for ransomware, right? Bitcoin, if you didn't know it, allows you to look at the transactions and see where the money's going and coming from, right? It's not as anonymous as you really think it is. The weakness is getting the money out of Bitcoin, really. That's the hard part. When you have $5.2 billion, right? Just go to the bank and cash that out, right? So they realized that with the limited amount of visibility they had, despite us saying, hey, we don't know what the ransoms are, but we know they're making a ton of money, right? These guys have a system down, right? And that's only limited visibility. They came up with an estimated ransom value from those IR firms of $148,000 for an attack on average. That wasn't the, it's higher this year than last year, but they have more visibility, and we can't trust numbers, right? Which as a math person freaks me out, right? But so we see that so you can estimate, you can come back with defensible numbers and say that, hey, for probably small to medium enterprise, right, I'm at $150,000 of ransom on average, right? And the total value was $400 million. So visibility, right? We still only have partial visibility, 400 million versus 5 billion, right? So we don't quite know what's going on yet with everything, but we can at least have some numbers we can trust, right? Which is the name of the game in risk management, right? You have to have something you can defend and go back to the bosses and try to manage the risk. The illicit finance disruption efforts, if we see, so there's two things going to happen. If we see ransoms stop, like as in ones that we know how to look for stop, right? They're going to continue. Sorry, they're going to continue. But what happens is we lose that visibility. It's the whole like, hey, why didn't they knock out the informant, kind of thing, where it's like, oh, they left them there so you keep on informing, right? We have a way to see right now, right? I will bet anyone one of the delicious burgers downstairs, like on any day of the week, that if you make ransoms illegal and some business has some small business, we'll say a restaurant, has an SBA-inspired loan tied to their personal credit and their house as collateral, they will pay that ransom to save their family, right? It's going to happen. It's not even an ethics or morality question, right? And so with this, we actually get some visibility, right? Now, what's happening is that there are other Bitcoin technologies, cryptocurrency technologies, that's how pervasive Bitcoin is, right? That are out there that, that have a lot of money going around. Not all of them allow for the visibility we have into the money flowing around, right? In fact, there are some that actually are not, they're designed so you can't. They're designed to be decentralized without that level of tracking, just so that the government can't come by and say, hey, knock down that exchange. You know, it's totally decentralized, peer-to-peer, very secure in its implementation from the ground up, right? So we're already starting to see where some ransomware operators are moving to those cryptocurrencies. My first question, right, on the business side was, okay, well, do those other cryptocurrencies have the capacity in their financial networks to actually go ahead and execute $5 billion in transactions, right? And the answer is yes, they do. We have 1.1 trillion for Bitcoin. Ethereum is 482 billion. We go down to number 6 here, 56 billion. There's still plenty of room there, right, for ransomware to run all of their known operations, $5 billion worth, through there, right, without really having a hitch. And Bitcoin, we have visibility, other ones we don't. So we may be losing that in the future, right? But we have it now, so we should use it now, is the point. We should all download that report. Again, I have nothing associated with the report, but I read it and I loved it, because it actually gave us numbers we can rely on. So on the insurance side, we actually have some cool business continuity numbers. Now, remember what I said about sometimes you can have a survey or you have a report come out, but the number of cases you're looking at is very low, and that can poison your results. Unfortunately, the number of claims here, they only knew the ransom in a third of them, so that's not good. You're already at 6 claims, and you only knew 4 of the 6, or you didn't know 4 of the 6. But you see where you have all the numbers here for business continuity. We can roughly get a ratio of about 1.6, right? So if you can figure out the ransom, roughly something, then you can start to multiply and get the business continuity pieces. Now you have something to work with to try to get that business continuity piece down, right? In addition to the ransom, of course, right? You have numbers to work with to be able to convince your CFO, to convince the COO to go ahead and spend money on this, right? Without them coming out with that $8,000 ransom, which has actually happened, where I've had reports come back and they're just like, oh no, look, it's gonna be a problem. I got petty cash, and I'm just like, do not trust that data, So, so really, we're still not quite having things settled here on, I don't have a nice story to give you to say, it is definitely, I'm a vendor, and it is definitely this one because that makes me the most money, that's not where we're at, right? We're just kind of we got a big problem, folks. We don't even know how big the problem is. That's what I'm trying to say. If you're confused too, of why this guy's up here doing this, I get it, right? Because I lost it at one point. When I saw that ratio, I had to put down everything for a week. I was like, I'm gonna just do coding or something to relax me, So, so what we do see though is that the more evidence we're getting, the velocity is showing it's not getting better, right? We are seeing that there is an 80% chance that once you're a victim once, you will be a victim again. We have had some of our clients for our prevention product who, while deciding whether to install it, got hit again, even before it got installed, right? That's happened a couple times now, actually. So 46% of the time, they think it's the same attackers. You know what this reminds me of? With ransomware as a service coming, where you have more and more salesmen out there, right? How many of you have sales guys call all day, right? Call you and leave voicemails and text you and everything else, right? Well, ransomware's gonna be the same thing, right? So what I'm thinking we're starting to see now is the Mafia protection money model, right? Where the ransom's only 150K, we can pretty much afford that. A lot of businesses can afford that. It's gonna hurt. It's gonna hurt like heck, but you can afford that. Take out a loan, whatever. Well, it's not enough to kill you. It's enough to make the payment keep on going so that they can keep going back to you over and over again. I think we're kind of heading towards there. It's my gut feeling. I'm going to stick with it, and I hope I'm wrong. But I think we're going to start seeing it show up as a line item on our budgets, right? We're going to say, okay, the business will take this much hit again. It's been 9 months. It's about time for the Mafia to come back and demand protection money again with a ransom. It just feels like it. But again, I just told you not to trust anything I ever said, right? That all these security people say. And here I am saying, well, trust my gut. But that's kind of where the evidence is going. And I would love for someone to have a B-sides next year where they say, this wacky guy, Dennis, gave these numbers, and I proved him wrong. Look at my math. Behold, glorious purpose. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. And I know I'll be out of time. So I did it, right? Do you guys have any questions while I'm here? That bad, huh?
No, it wasn't that bad. It was great.
You guys like it? You good?
But tell us a fun fact about you.
Oh, geez. So when I was in the Army, I was artillery, and then I became an MP person. So I did like missions and convoys.
Wait, you were artillery? They shot you out of a cannon?
Well, it gets better. So they took away all that, and I had like a Jeep, right? But I had all of my SANS books with me because I wanted to be able to get back into IT and security when I got back, right? Well, you know how the Qurans are all like very fancy with like the thread bound and everything? It's not just for looks. So my SANS books, my security books, GCSE and everything else, right? They were melting during missions. Like I'd pull it out and it would be like next to like boiling hot like grenades and like, ammo cans and everything. And like chapters would fly out. It looks super technical, right? You've ever had like one of the SANS books. So there are always like Iraqi kids around that would like grab our papers. And of course it looks really important, right? Seeing like how to configure Cisco router securely kind of stuff, right? And they always thought it was like mission stuff because they didn't read English. And I'm slow. I was fast. I was 25 or whatever, but like slow compared to an Iraqi kid, And I would chase them for like a quarter mile in the desert until like for way too many times before I realized that that's never going to win, And when I got back, I started an IT business, and I could actually tell the chapters. It was so sad that I was missing because I would get to a certain point and be like, how do I do that? And then like I'd go get my book and there'd be like a gap, where that chapter is just gone forever. And I had to buy a new SANS book. That's how it happened. Is that
Now
cool?
that is a great fun fact. Come on, give him a hand.
Thanks, everyone.